What's up guys, just Josh and we're bringing you guys a little bit of a different video today. This is more of a music commentary video about a topic that I've wanted to discuss for some time on the channel, and that is how I think Metallica's Saint Anger could have been saved. So if you're even a somewhat serious Metallica fan, you are undoubtedly aware of the infamous Saint Anger album. It was their 8th studio album released on June 5th of 2003. And it has proven to be not only the most polarizing album in Metallica's discography, but one of the most polarizing albums in all of metal. Now, I'm going to be honest, back in the day, I did like this album. I'm 20 years old, so I grew up with Saint Anger and Death Magnetic. Obviously, I went back and checked out the older stuff, like the first 5, Load and Reload, all that. But these two albums were my introduction to Metallica. And I did like Saint Anger back in the day, as I said, but not so much anymore. I still listen to it like every now and then as sort of a guilty pleasure kind of thing, because there is some potential with the album, and I do think that it could have been a lot better than what we got with 3 major changes. There's 3 glaring issues that I noticed with the album that I think could have been improved upon and changed, and I'm going to discuss them in great detail here in this video. Now, before I get into discussing these 3 issues, I just wanted to give you guys a brief summary of sort of the recording process of Saint Anger. I'm sure we're probably already all aware of this, but it'll just provide some context for when I start discussing these 3 issues. So recording for Saint Anger started in January of 2001, and pretty much right as the band was getting ready to enter the studio to record the album, longtime bassist Jason Newsted would announce his departure from the band. He had been their bassist since 1986, after the unfortunate passing of their previous bassist Cliff Burton the same year. Right after Cliff's funeral, they pretty much immediately started auditioning bass players. They auditioned around 50, and Jason Newsted would be accepted into the band. His first album with the band was 1988's And Justice for All, and his last album with the band was 1997's Reload. Immediately finding a new bass player would prove to be very difficult, so Metallica decided to hold off on finding a new bass player until after the album was complete. As such, producer Bob Rock agreed to fill in on bass for the record. After this, Metallica officially entered the studio to start working on Saint Anger, and at first the band was very unproductive. Tensions were at an all-time high, especially between James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, who would constantly argue and bicker during the recording process. To make matters worse, in July of 2001, James Hetfield admitted himself into rehab for alcoholism and other undisclosed addictions, thus halting the recording process. In December of 2001, James Hetfield would return to the band, and recording for Saint Anger commenced, although Hetfield was only allowed to work on the album from noon to 4 p.m., so this really constricted Metallica's time to work on the album. Upon James Hetfield returning, there were still tensions within Metallica, so they recruited a therapist to help them work through their issues and continue as a band and continue making Saint Anger. Now, stylistically, it is seen as a departure from their previous work. It still retains some of the thrash metal sounds of their older work, but it also embraced some of the alternative metal and nu metal sounds of the early 2000s. Metallica decided to tune lower on this album as well, tuning the guitars to drop C for most of the album. Now, there's a few other tunings on the album. Dirty Window uses drop C sharp, Invisible Kid uses drop G sharp, and The Unnamed Feeling uses A sharp standard. This results in a very muddy sound, especially on Invisible Kid, which I think has the worst guitar tone of the whole album. But in general, the album has a very muddy guitar tone, and just an overall raw production as well. Bob Rock said he wanted the album to sound like 4 guys getting in a garage and writing rock songs together for the first time. He also admitted that there was no time to get amazing performances out of James, and he also did not use any auto-tune or really any polishing to the production after the fact. The decision was also made to not include guitar solos on the album. Kirk Hammett said they tried to do guitar solos on the album, but they didn't work. They just felt like an afterthought, so they scrapped them. Now, this is definitely a sign of the times as well. In the early 2000s, guitar solos were pretty much non-existent in nu metal. You really saw no nu metal bands doing guitar solos. And by the way, I'm not calling Saint Anger a nu metal album, but it definitely has some nu metal influences, especially in the guitar tone. And the drums, yeah, I mean, nothing can really be said about the drums on this album that hasn't been said already. It's become a joke that has been beaten to death at this point, Lars's trash can snare on the album. But it really does sound like a trash can, dude. It really does. And I can see what they're going for with the raw production, the muddy guitar tone, and the raw drums. But it really just doesn't work at all. I mean, if you played somebody this album and they're only somewhat familiar with Metallica, like Enter Sandman is all they know, they would not call this Metallica. They would not think it sounds like Metallica, because it really doesn't in most parts of the album. The trash can snare really doesn't fit Metallica. The lower tuned guitars really doesn't fit Metallica. And some bands do it well. Some bands do low tuned guitars well, like numerous death metal and deathcore bands and even metalcore bands. And some bands even use the trash can snare tastefully. I'm not into slamming brutal death metal very much, but it uses the trash can snare and it fits that sound. Lamb of God on their first album, New American Gospel, had sort of a trash can snare, and it fits the sound because it's not overbearing. The drums on this album really get overbearing in parts, and they're so loud to the point where if you just upload the drum track of Frantic to YouTube, just the drums, no guitar, no bass, no vocals, just the drums isolated, you'll get copyright claims for the whole song. That's how loud the drums are on this album. But anyways, I'm not going to bore you guys anymore with the recording process and the production of this album. We all know this stuff already. Let's get into the 3 issues that I have with this album, and the 3 issues I think they could have improved upon to salvage this album. The first issue being the production. Now, I've already said everything about the production that I really need to say. I'm just going to go through each of the instruments briefly and how they could have improved the production of each instrument. So, starting off with the guitars, Metallica does not need to tune to drop C. They just don't. I mean, they could have made it work with better production. There's tons of bands that use drop C tastefully and it works very well and it sounds great, such as Chimera, Killswitch Engage, God forbid. They use drop C and it sounds great for them. Honestly, I just don't think Metallica needs to tune low. Especially not to drop G sharp like they did on Invisible Kid, or A sharp standard like they did on the Unnamed Feeling. It just doesn't work. The lowest I think they should have gone is D standard or drop D. Honestly, now like I said, they could have made drop C work probably with better production, but Metallica is just not one of those bands that needs to tune low. And then the bass. If you listen to Bob Rock's soloed bass on Frantic, he does sound good. He does have a decent tone. But, I don't know, man. The bass is just take it or leave it on this album. You really don't hear much of it, and that's one of Metallica's major issues. Their bass has never been very audible. Ironically, on the 3 albums when they took a major style shift is when the bass was the most audible, that being the Black Album, Load and Reload. The bass sounds really good on that album, on those 3 albums, and really cuts through in some parts. And then the drums. I mean, just use the normal drum set. That's it. That's all I gotta say. No need for a trash can snare, no nothing. Just use a normal drum set like they did on literally every other album that they did. And then the vocals. Now, Bob Rock did say that there was not enough time to get decent performances out of James. And yeah, the vocals are really like cracky, pitchy, and just not very good in some parts. But they didn't use any auto-tune, and I got to give them some credit there. There's tons of bands that just use auto-tune, just be like, oh, you hit a wrong note, we'll just fix it in the mix. So I definitely respect them for doing that, and it definitely makes for a raw sound, but I really just don't think it sounds great. And that brings me to the second issue, and that's the actual performances on the album. Now I'm going to start with the guitars again. James Hetfield and Kirk Hammett, especially James Hetfield, are known to be very, very tight players, very precise with their picking and rhythm playing. But on this album, the double tracking between the left and right side between Kirk and James are really not very locked in parts, not very solid, and even downright sloppy in a couple parts on the album. And I know they went for more of a live feel on this album, more of a garage band, like jamming type feel, but there's no excuse for Metallica not to be locked in as tight as they can possibly be with their guitars. And I'm going to show you guys a couple examples I found on the album where the double tracking is not the best. So those are just two examples I found on the album where the double tracking really isn't that solid. And for copyright reasons, I don't want to play anymore. There's definitely more examples where the double tracking isn't the best on the album. But in the interest of copyright reasons, I don't want to play them all. This video is probably already going to get taken down for the videos that I'm showing here on the screen. So yeah, but I know what you might be thinking. Oh, Josh, those didn't even sound that bad. Hey, Josh, I bet you can't play guitar better than Metallica. And yeah, those are fair points. You know, I'm nowhere near the level of a guitarist that James or Kirk are at. I know that, but those are just 2 points I found where the guitars really aren't very locked in on the album. On Some Kind of Monster, that first example, whoever's in the right channel, I don't know if it's James or Kirk, it might be Kirk, but they mute an extra note on that da-na, 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 that part of the riff, that little tail of the riff there. The left side obviously is not muting that note, and it just makes a really uneven sound. And then after the chorus, that little section after the chorus of My World, the guitars are kind of sloppy there, not very locked in. And I get that it plays into the whole like live aspect or garage band aspect that this album is supposed to have, but it just comes off as unprofessional for such a massive band like Metallica to not have locked in guitars on their album. It's just really weird. And then the vocals as well. I already said how James's voice kind of sounds very scratchy and very pitchy and cracky on this album. But I forgot to talk about the lyrics. This album really suffers in the lyric department. I don't want to say that no thought went into the lyrics. I think too much thought went into the lyrics. In the documentary, you see James, as well as Kirk and Lars, writing lyrics. I don't think Kirk has ever written lyrics for Metallica before Saint Anger. Maybe Lars has, I don't know. But yeah, lyrics like, shoot me again, I ain't dead yet. And he repeats shoot me again over and over again. That song in general just has terrible lyrics, honestly. And My World, the motherfuckers got in my head, trying to make me someone else instead. Mama, why is it raining in my room? Cheer up, boy, clouds will move on soon. It's kind of juvenile, honestly. And you know, Metallica's never been known for having Shakespearean level lyrics, but on this album especially, the lyrics really take a backseat. And then the drumming. Now, trash can aside, I actually like Lars' drumming on this album. I know that's crazy, I think with a normal drum set, the drums on this album would sound really good. Now the parts where he does that fast double bass is honestly really sloppy, especially in All Within My Hands and Saint Anger and all that, but I think if they used a normal drum set, people would actually realize how good Lars' drumming is on this album, because it is really good, honestly. I might even argue that it's his best drum work since Justice. Again, trash can aside. Just ignore how the drums sound and listen to what he's actually playing. His drumming on this album is actually really good. And now it's time to talk about the third and final major issue that I have with Saint Anger and every single Metallica album after the Black Album: the length of the album. Metallica albums do not need to be 70 to 75 minutes. They just don't. Just trim the filler, trim the bad songs, and give us a 55, 60, 65 minute max album. Okay, Justice was around 65 minutes. I think the Black Album was like 61 or 2. That's it. That's all you need to do. If you're gonna make a 75-minute album, have it be good all the way through. Okay? I can't really think of any 75-minute album I've heard that is good all the way through. It's just very difficult to pull off. And Hardwired has 2 discs for whatever reason, even though it's under 80 minutes. If it was over 80 minutes, yeah, then you'd need to have 2 discs because a CD can only hold 80 minutes of music. But anyways, this video is not about Hardwired, obviously. Just trim the filler. Like, yeah, they trimmed some filler from the Presidio or Presidio, however you say it, stuff like songs like Temptation and Boogeyman and Dead Kennedy Rolls. If you haven't heard those songs, my god, I'm jealous because you thought Saint Anger was bad. Just wait till you hear Temptation. Jesus Christ. Anyways, yeah, just trim the filler, give us a shorter album. So many of these songs could be cut in half and you would not miss a thing. Biggest example being Some Kind of Monster. Just look at the radio edit of Some Kind of Monster. The song was cut in half and it is exponentially better for it. They even fixed the production on that one a little bit. The drums sound way less trash candy. The drums sound pretty good on there. And the guitar tone is still eh. And James's voice is still eh. But the production is better on there at least. If the whole album sounded like that, I think it would be a lot better. Even with the same crappy performances across the board. But yeah. In short, Saint Anger is the album that saved Metallica, because if they didn't make this album, I think they would have broke up, because they had so many just internal issues, personal issues at this time, and this album was really just a way for them to exercise their demons, so to speak. They came back pretty strong on Death Magnetic. That album still had production issues, but it was exponentially better than Saint Anger. And then Hardwired, now I think Hardwired's kind of a mixed bag, but Hardwired honestly has the best production they've ever had on an album. That album sounds really good. And yeah, apparently Metallica's going to have a new album out this year. I hope it's good, because Hardwired honestly left a bit to be desired for me. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys think Saint Anger could have been better with these changes, or do you like Saint Anger just the way it is? I mean, there's, like I said, Saint Anger does have its fans. I actually know a couple people that really like Saint Anger. So yeah, I mean, I myself, I'm kind of indifferent on Saint Anger at this point. I used to like it back when I was first getting into Metallica. Now not so much, but I still listen to it from time to time. I still think that songs like The Unnamed Feeling and the radio edit of Some Kind of Monster are good songs. There's definitely salvageable material here, and I think that it could have been a way better album with these changes. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.